So this morning, as we get up, open our newspapers, turn on our TVs, the news cycle is dominated by what's happening south of the border, and it's scary. It really is. There are more than 40 U.S. cities that are under lockdown. They're under curfew. You can't even go on your front porch after dark without getting shot at with rubber bullets and paint pellets. There are lots of National Guard are deployed everywhere. There are people with assault rifles standing on street corners. There are lots of reports of police brutality, more reports of protester brutality. One of the things that I commonly hear, especially after that first night when the video of the looters looting that Target store were circulating, one thing that I hear frequently is, these blacks aren't helping their cause any. That by lighting fires and looting, that they're not effectively protesting the murder of one of their own. They're really just kind of hurting themselves. And while it's certainly true that adding violence into the mix, especially into an already volatile and chaotic situation, the violence doesn't help. Yet at the same time, there's something very condescending and patriarchal about saying, the way that they're protesting doesn't make me feel safe. I want them to protest, within the rule of law, right? If they would protest the way that society dictates, then we would listen. Which it seems like a nonsensical statement. I don't know what we expect, that they would sit on a sidewalk with a street sign, little placard of some kind, get the appropriate permits and not block traffic and not get in the way. I'm not sure that anybody would listen to anything like that. But at root of this comment, these kind of comments that they're not helping their cause by looting. Basically, what we're saying is that we don't feel safe, right? Because they're out of control. They're not following the rules of society. If they would follow the rules of society, we would all be better. But what if it is those very rules of society that are making them feel unsafe, and that this is in fact what they're protesting against? And that one rule, the big one that we don't want to give voice to, is simply this: that black bodies are not worth the same as white bodies. And I know for a lot of us, we have this reaction when we hear those words. We don't even want to hear the words. We find it offensive. But I don't think that makes them any less true. Certainly we know that black people are incarcerated and killed and beaten and unjustly accused far more than white folks are. And in a lot of ways, we want to justify that by saying, well, yeah, but they were committing a crime already, and the policeman was just defending himself. But this latest incident with George Floyd, I mean, that really just reveals the lie, doesn't it? Because the video quite clearly shows a man who is subdued, who is not resisting, just handcuffed, laying on the ground, surrounded by 4 police officers. And yet he was killed. So he had the life literally crushed out of him. There's nothing more that he could have done to be cooperative and to show that he is not a threat. And yet he was killed. Ahmaud Arbery is another one who recently was in the news. What we forget about his case, though, is that he was actually killed back in February. So although it was only maybe 3 weeks ago or something that his case came to light, for 2.5 months, nobody really seemed to care that he was dead. So there was no real investigation. Despite knowing exactly who the killers were, there was no charges laid. There was no real intent to prosecute. Basically, his life was not worth really anything. Nobody was going to do anything to seek justice for this young man who was just intentionally gunned down. And for every one of those high-profile cases where somebody is killed, there are others who are killed, but there was nobody there with a cell phone or a video camera to record it. There are thousands of others who are just beaten and roughed up, who are unjustly arrested, and we want to deny this, but I think we're at the point that we we simply can't anymore. And there's one incident that really kind of brings this to the forefront for me, and this is Amy Cooper in New York. So she was a woman who took her dog out to play in Central Park. So she had the dog off the leash, and the dog was running around. And a black man came up to her and said, "Hey, lady, you got to put your dog on a leash, because that's the rules, right?" I mean, she was breaking the rules. He was watching birds, and the dog tearing around through all the bushes, of course, was disturbing the birds, so the bird watching wasn't going well. But regardless, I mean, she should have had her dog on a leash. So despite the fact that she was in the wrong, and instead of just saying, "Oh, yeah, okay, I'll put my dog on a leash," she got all offended at being corrected by this man. And so she threatened to call the cops, and indeed she did call the cops. Now, in some ways, we might want to just say, okay, well, she was just overreacting because she was, in the park and alone, and maybe she was scared or something like that. But to me, the word choice that she used was actually quite revealing. Her threat was that she was going to call the police and tell them that an African-American man was threatening her. So by bringing race into it, by specifically saying not just a man, but an African-American man, it revealed the fact that she knew deep down, she might not want to admit to any kind of racism herself, but she knew deep down that a black man threatening a white woman, that things were not going to go well for that black man. That when the police showed up, I mean, we look at George Floyd, there's a chance that he might not survive that encounter, right? So by challenging her to put her dog on a leash, he might actually be killed. Certainly, he would be arrested, quite possibly violently arrested, roughed up and beaten some, subdued. But basically, her actions just revealed that we are aware of this racism. As much as we might want to deny it in public society, we know that it's there. And there are times that we'll weaponize that, essentially, right? We'll use that knowledge to our advantage. Now, I'm not proposing any solution for racism today. I simply don't know how to overcome that. There's not an easy answer. But I think it starts with listening. I think everything that's going on right now is prompting us as white folks that maybe it's time for us not to be dictating to other people how they should be acting, but maybe this is a time for us to just stop being defensive and stop denying and just listen to other people's life experiences. Listen to their stories. Listen to how they live. And maybe in the listening, we can start to empathize. And in empathizing, we can start to work together and start to realize that we are, in fact, one human family, that as Paul writes, there's no distinction between slave and free and male and female. We can't keep subdividing ourselves. But if we want to be one, I think it starts with simply listening without judgment. And I hope and pray that we can do that as a society.